In July 2025, the Hong Kong government introduced the Same-Sex Partnership Registration Bill, a proposal that would allow same-sex couples who are already married overseas to register the partnership in Hong Kong. The bill offers limited rights, such as making medical decisions and handling end-of-life arrangements, but it falls short of full legal recognition. It does not cover housing, taxation, immigration, or parenting rights. This bill was introduced in response to a landmark 2023 ruling by the Court of Final Appeal in the Sam Ji-Kit case. The court ordered the government to provide a legal framework to recognize same-sex relationship within 2 years, and this is the government's answer. However, the proposal has sparked major debate. Supporters say it is a first step towards equality. Critics, including LGBTQ+ groups, argue that it creates a two-tiered system since couples must first marry overseas to be eligible, and many core rights are still excluded. Others, like conservative lawmaker Priscilla Leung, has called this bill rushed and poorly consulted. She warns it could open the door to adoption and gender recognition issues, and claims Hong Kong is not learning from what she sees as backlash in the West. The bill is scheduled for its first reading in the Legislative Council on Wednesday, 16 July 2025. So what does all this actually mean for LGBTQ+ families in Hong Kong, and how do advocates on the ground feel about it? To help us understand more, I spoke with Jerome Yau, co-founder of Hong Kong Marriage Equality, a non-profit organization to advance legal recognition and protection for same-sex couples in Hong Kong. Here's our conversation.
First of all, thank you very much. HKME stands for Hong Kong Marriage Equality. It's an NGO set up in 2019. So 6 years ago, well, as you can tell from the name, this is an organization advancing equal marriage in Hong Kong. That's the sole focus. Our strategy has always been advocacy for, well, one thing is advocacy for listening, in the sense of we try to listen to concerns. Now, what we believe is in any society there will always be supporters and those who do not support a particular initiative, but usually there is, we call it a movable middle. People kind of right, so in between, maybe they're not quite ready to support an issue. So our job has always been trying to bring those people to our side. So that's the overall sort of strategy, and of course we want to win hearts and minds, because I think that's very, very important. So what we have been doing, you know, I think first of all we've been we produce numerous videos featuring same-sex couples. We want to tell people as to who they are, why they want their relationships to be recognized. I think it's important to quote unquote humanize the issue. I mean, when it comes to equal marriage, sometimes many people think about legal rights. Certainly it is, but I think it's more than just legal rights. We're talking about something impacting two loving individuals, and we want to humanize the issue as much as we can. So we have all these stories. We've partnered with academics for research. Research, it's very important because these research findings, they tell us the sentiment of society at a particular time. And of course, over the years, we've seen lots of encouraging numbers. For example, back in 2023, that's the latest survey, 60% of the population supported equal marriage. So that's a very good number. We've done our own in-house research. Those findings help us to craft our messages. In those two instances, we were very interested to find out why people were not ready to support marriage equality. What were what their concerns were, the kind of hesitations, and how could we help them to navigate those either misinformation or fear. So again, those findings help us to craft our messages. And of course, last least, last year we made a detailed submission to the government to make the case for equal marriage. And of course, we do our usual engagement with, for example, we've met with people from different sectors, not least the business sector. We've seen lawmakers, and of course, we've in close contact with members of the LGBT plus community. So I mean, we are not like a very big organization. We with relatively limited resources, but hopefully by partnering with like-minded organizations or individuals, well, we can amplify our voices and messages. And yeah, so that's who we are. It's a matter of choice. Obviously, whether couples want to get married, it's their decision. As you put it quite rightly, it's not every single straight couples they want to get married. But I think it's important to have that choice, first of all. And again, the fact of the matter is we do have couples who are in committed and stable relationships, and their relationships should be recognized and protected by law. And that would send a very clear message, being that society would not discriminate these relationships because of basically the nature of the relationship being formed by two people of the same genders. So I think that's very important in terms of equal protection, striving or to achieve greater LGBT plus equality or and inclusion for that matter. And fundamentally, as I've been saying, it's good to have choices. I mean, whether couples want to get married, again, I say, look, hey, they have to make up their own minds. But hey, what about for those who want to get married? I mean, we should provide that choice for those couples. Hong Kong does not recognize same-sex marriages. There's no such thing as a civil union or civil partnership, nothing. However, because of a series of court challenges, right now, same-sex relationships are recognized for particular purposes, namely spousal visa, taxation, public housing, inheritance rights. So these are sort of, I would say, the four major areas. And of course, there's some other things as well. But I would call these are the four major areas. So now, of course, because of a landmark decision that was made back in 2023, the Court of Final Appeal, which is the highest court of the land here in Hong Kong, ruled that while there isn't a constitutional right to same-sex marriage, but the government does have a positive obligation to recognize these relationships through an alternative framework. So it gave the government 2 years to implement such a framework. And just quite recently, on Thursday, the government tabled a paper to the legislature outlining its proposal calling for a registration system. But there are some caveats. For example, according to the proposal, in order to be eligible to register those relationships, those relationships would have to be registered overseas first. Just to put in plain language, let's just say we have a same-sex couple. They wanted to register their relationship in Hong Kong, but because their relationship hasn't been registered overseas yet, then they would not be eligible. So that's something that we are very concerned about. And of course, in terms of rights and obligations, you've seen all the reports. It's quite limited, actually. Okay, so first of all, from our standpoint, we raise 3 points about the current proposal. First of all, we call the approach, or what it has been outlined as very conservative, a very conservative approach. Secondly, we have huge concerns about that particular condition requiring overseas registration. We think that's unfair. And thirdly, we recognize that having some protection is better than none. So we call it a tiny step forward, really. So that's how we see the current proposal. Of course, I need to make it clear that it's just a proposal right now. The bill hasn't been actually made public yet. So I think and I've been saying, we hope more details will be available when the bill is made available or gazetted through the normal process. Details are sketchy. As to those concerns, I think some lawmakers are conflating between marriage equality and gender issues. Certainly up to this stage, at this particular moment, we know 39 countries and territories around the world recognizing same-sex marriages. None has turned the clock back. No. So I can only assume that some lawmakers were conflating between the two issues. Certainly, I think lots of people have raised their concerns as to the inadequacies of the current proposal. I think that's plain. I mean, obviously, you know, when it comes to relationships, protections in relationship, it's more than just making medical decisions, afterlife arrangements, or housing, or inheritance. I mean, we all know about that. You know, there are lots of things. So I think it's still a long way to go for us to achieve full equal marriage. Okay, well, that's a very good question. From our perspective, we think Hong Kong is ready for equal marriage. The fact of the matter is 60% of the population expressed their support through a robust scientific survey. I think that's a clear message. Now, of course, in any society, there will be conservative voices. And in Hong Kong, these voices are very strong and they're very vocal. And they're very, as I said, very vocal. But at the same time, they don't represent the majority. I think it has a lot to do with Hong Kong history, or for that matter, to a broad extent, in certain parts of Asia. You know, when we talk about conservative voices, people automatically think about culture and traditions, which to a degree it is true. But again, in Hong Kong's context, if we are talking about the traditional definition of marriage, the question that needs to be asked is, what was how do we define traditions, and what's sort of the traditional definition? To most people, you know, the traditional definition would be the union of one man and one woman to the exclusion of others. But in Hong Kong, that's not the case, because until 1971, Hong Kong did recognize Chinese customary marriages, which means one man, one wife, and multiple concubines. Basically, the nature of the marriages in those days, according to Chinese customs, was not monogamous. Period. End of story. So it's nothing traditional again. So I think the other thing I think we need to understand is traditions change over times. It happens throughout the history of humankind. It's nothing really new. Traditions do not set in stone, contrary to sort of popular perceptions. So that traditional argument, it's a dead end. Honestly, lots of people have thought that out. Oh, if we are interested in arguing about traditions, what about if we're talking about Chinese traditional cultures? We all know, you know, men and women, they were not equal. Women were subservient to men. Are we going to bring those back? You know, I don't think so. So come on, don't cherry pick. I think we just need to look at the broader picture. So of course we know some people love to cherry pick. The other thing is Christianity. If you read closer, many of these voices, these people, they are Christians. Why is that? That has a lot to do with Hong Kong's colonial history. The fact of the matter, of course, in those days, Christianity was introduced to Hong Kong via the British government. Lots of missionaries were coming from the UK. And of course, they were very good in providing basic social welfare services, operating good schools, no question about that. But at the same time, certain religious values were brought into Hong Kong, and somehow these values became deeply ingrained locally. So that's the reason. And if you look across Asia, the other thing is the legal side of things. The criminalization of homosexuality happened because of the Brits. That happened to Hong Kong, that happened to India, Singapore, and Malaysia. So I think when we talk about Asia, I think the question we need to bear in mind is we're talking a very big place, a big continent. There are lots of cultures, traditions. There isn't a single Asian culture or traditions, although there's I would say, several common threads. For example, in general, we value collectivism over individualism, but that's also relatively speaking. And of course, we talk about tradition. We all know India for a long, long time, third gender, but it was sort of banned by the Brits. Now that they're starting to realizing their own real sort of genuine culture. So I think it's important to recognize those factors. But coming back to Hong Kong, I think Hong Kong society is ready. 60%, that's a very strong proof. The other thing is through my personal observation. So a visible indicator is how often do we see two guys holding hands on streets. Mind you, this is not Middle East, where there isn't a culture where you can have two male holding hands as being socially affectionate. There's no such thing in Hong Kong. If you see two guys holding hands on streets, most likely they are in a relationship. It has been becoming more and more common. And most importantly, people just don't care. So I think that's a good indicator as to, in general, people don't think don't make a big fuss of it. Now, of course, I'm not saying people are all happy and okay about same-sex couples. Definitely not. Of course, you can still, as in anyway, even in the States, after 10 years, you still have some very vocal voices against same-sex marriages. But leave those aside. I think in general, Hong Kong society is ready, but just unfortunate that the naysayers, the voices of the naysayers, they are very loud, they're very influential, and that's what created the impression that as some lawmakers will love to claim, oh, according to their own survey, lots of people were against. But I guess that question is how representative their survey is. So there's a big question mark. I think the most reliable one is most people would agree that is the one that has been done by free universities according to scientific principles. Emerged from one of our, I would say, research. So that research was a focus group type of research. So we did it through a public opinion firm, and they invited local Hong Kong Chinese from the 20s all the way to the 60s, divided into three age groups, equally spread between both males and female. I think I did hear like some of the participants saying that, look, hey, I know they are fine, like I know they're same-sex couples, I know it's cool, it's okay, but as long as it's not like happening in my family. But then, of course, the interviewer started drawing a little bit. I was like, what if like your son or daughter came out to you as gay? This particular, or some parents would say, I would need to making sure whether my kids knew what they were talking about. But in the end, if they reach the age of majority, being 18 years old, and if they were certain that that's the case, then they would say, oh, we have to accept that as well. So I think even though what we are seeing is in Hong Kong, definitely we have a strong percentage of people that are ready to embrace LGBT plus inclusion to a very extent. When it comes to marriage, I think, as you put it quite rightly, the more people see it as being no big deal, the people will think, why on earth we need to oppose, which is a rather actually a conservative thing to do, promoting healthy relationships, really. And I do also believe that people are capable of change. By way of sharing a personal story, but many years ago, I mean, I was living in Canada, and I had an ex-colleague that she came to me. Now, she called herself a progressive or liberal Christian, but at that time, she had a very strong feeling about same-sex marriage. She came to me and she asked, hey, I know you guys, your relationships need to be protected or recognized. Couldn't you call it something else? Why on earth you need to use the word marriage? To her, marriage, the word marriage, it's very special. It should be reserved for heterosexual marriages only. I started sort of cooling down her. I said, look, I hear you, but let's just take a step back. Basically, I asked her, don't you think it's kind of silly that because if society started recognizing same-sex relationships or same-sex marriages, that would I would say, devalue or cheapen marriage. But doesn't that sound silly? And I said, look, in order to all those fear-mongering arguments saying that it is a slippery slope, if you started doing same-sex marriage, what about next? Would it be like bestiality would become legal? I said, look, hang on, you're jumping too far. I said, look, we are talking about two individuals in a committed relationship. They want their relationships to be recognized. We're not talking about anything else. So let's just don't jump to conclusions. But in the end, I told her, look, it's okay if we have disagreement, if we don't agree on this particular thing. Friendship is more important than anything else. So we stopped the conversation at there. A few years later on, she came back to me and she said, no, I'm okay with same-sex marriage. So, of course, it took her quite some time. But I think the key takeaways, first of all, people can change. And secondly, it's because when she came to me that she was okay, by that time, of course, marriage had already so legalized, and and I think when people started seeing, like, if you start after you legalize same-sex marriage, life still goes on. The sky won't fall down. So I think people, when they started seeing that, then some of their fears will go away, and I think that's why that visibility is so important.
That
The most, I mean, one simple thing is for those who still have connections with Hong Kong, is to influence their friends, their relatives, people that they know, as to explain why it's important to support. The good thing is leveraging the experience, for example, in New Zealand, for that matter, or if you're living in Australia, where places where same-sex marriage is legal. Tell the stories, the real stories, as to, hey, we've seen that society still goes on. It's no big deal. And actually, society is getting even better, more cohesive. Share real stories, real experience, and influence, your friends, your relatives, anyone you know. I mean, it's important to make these voices heard. Right now, the conversation, especially when it comes to people who are against, these voices are dominated by, obviously, these vocal opponents. I mean, that's given in any society, but again, that does not represent the majority. I think some people do not speak up for a lot of reasons, and I think they need to speak up in ways they feel comfortable. I'm not saying they need to, I mean, I'm not saying that they need to start coming out and speak out in a way that they feel uncomfortable, but they could do lots of things quietly and gently. I always say, when it comes to advocacy, it's not about argument, it's about persuasion. The art of persuasion is engaging in small talk. If you start coming in and trying to convert people, chances are that won't work at all. So don't do that. Don't engage in a big argument. This is not a debate. It is about persuasion. So small talk. Use real stories, especially if you happen to know couples like getting married, like telling them, hey, I know, let's say, John and Peter, or Mary and Anne, they've been married, and they just live like, as I said, traditional couples, and their relationships obviously stable and whatnot. Those real life stories, they are important. And the more people share those stories, the more speak up, the better. Because I think it's just a matter of making sure that those voices are heard. And when the time comes, if, let's just say, we don't know yet, let's just say if there's a public consultation, that would be a good time to write letters and emails, and to tell policymakers why. How, even on one hand, I would say we recognize the current proposal is far from adequate, but I think there's also a sentiment that this is an important, yes, it's a tiny step, but it's also quite an important one. And to making sure that we need to, drive progress. So, of course, for us, the ultimate goal is full marriage equality, because fundamentally, we believe that's the only way that could ensure full protection and full dignity and full recognition, which these couples deserve. We've been saying to people, almost 25 years of experiences in terms of Netherlands became the first country in the world legalizing same-sex marriage back in 2001. So count the numbers, almost 25 years right now, 39 jurisdictions. Everything goes well, no adverse effect whatsoever. And in Asia, the latest being Thailand. And kudos to Thailand. The government did it on its own with strong support from society. And look at what happened. So I think, Hong Kong is capable, it's ready. But I think just unfortunate that we have a very strong and vocal opposition. And, with a government who is treading very cautiously. So, but I hope that if we have more voices coming from, I say, non-activists, average people, that would bolster the case, and hopefully we could see progress, more progress in the future. I somehow I think we could see more progress in Asia within the next 10-15 years. It's just a rough time frame. So as we all know, there are lawsuits going on in Japan, and I know activists in Korea have filed lawsuits as well. I know activists are working hard in Vietnam and Cambodia. The interesting thing about Cambodia is the government has made a pledge about LGBT equality a few years back. Now, of course, it was just a pledge, but we shall see. But I'm hopeful that we would see more progress in Asia. But I think the key to progress in Asia is how sometimes I use this phrase, learn globally, but act locally, in terms of we need to learn from the global experiences. But we cannot just copy and paste. We need to adapt to the local context and culture and find stories and narratives that resonate with the local population. I think we need to go back to our own history or culture in terms of, hey, if we look back in time, whether actually in ancient past, actually the culture wasn't that relatively homophobic. Now, of course, we need to take things into context. I'm not suggesting that you would magically find something that in Asian culture it was all embracing, maybe with a few exceptions, but at the same time, the attitude was a bit, say, more tolerating, for example, because quite often what we have seen in Asia is because of modernization, the wave of modernization, and then followed by colonialism, we imported Western values because in those days we saw those values as advanced, and we somehow, especially mixed with religion, namely Christianity, then over time these values started becoming ingrained, as if we treat those as native values. So sometimes we need to ask these hard questions. As I explained earlier, if we see the common thread between Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, and India, it was the British who introduced laws that criminalized homosexual behavior. So that's a clear example as the interplay between all these different factors. So I'm hopeful that we will see. It's not going to be easy, because however we're going to see it, one thing for certain is it touches on law and policy, and usually that depending on each country's legal traditions, it may make things a bit easier, it may make things a bit difficult. But nonetheless, I think my concluding remark is we should remain hopeful. I think the way I see it is progress never happens sort of in a straight path. It's always twisty and windy, and sometimes it takes a very, very long time. It's a never-ending journey, but we need to keep our faith. And I think these days, the good thing is we have seen more places, for example, recognizing same-sex marriages. We're not talking about just the usual Western countries, certainly in Asia. We can talk about Taiwan, we can talk about Thailand, and of course, to a certain extent, Nepal. But hey, even Cuba did it a few years ago. So I think, look, we should remain hopeful, and let's hope that we'll see more progress. Small steps are important. Don't estimate the power of those small steps, because over time, those small steps could translate to become something even bigger. So it doesn't hurt for some, depending of course on each country or jurisdiction. Those people on the ground would know the best. But general, I would say it doesn't hurt to focus on some practical small steps first, and then you build from there, because it does take time to achieve full equality and inclusion. But I would say let's keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best.